Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, the Aces, the Golden Knights, they're all champions in the city of Las Vegas. What can the Raiders, if anything, take away from those championship runs? We'll continue that conversation, plus a whole lot more coming up on Thursday's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for June 15th, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won, and won, and won, and won, and won.
And welcome here, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. And, of course, if you're checking us out on YouTube, it's thanks to my man Ari. He does a great job each and every day making sure we're up on YouTube, looking good, sounding good. We definitely appreciate him. Matter of fact, he's got some tweaks going on that he's doing with the YouTube page. So as you continue to see it evolve, we definitely want to shout him out each and every day and definitely want to appreciate you as well for checking us out on YouTube. And of course, I got a lot to get to on today's show. If you want to hit up Ari on Twitter, you can always do that at Ari Produces. You can hit me up on Twitter as well at your boy Q254. And you know, we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line wide open like some old school TV antennas, 707-654-4693. Those calls and texts will come up in segment number 3. Segment number 2 will continue the conversation we started on Tuesday about what the Raiders could take away from the Aces, from the Golden Knights. As they're both champions in the city of Las Vegas, what could the Raiders do? They don't want to be the only ones not at the party, right? The championship party, and they're not invited. They want to take something away from what the Aces and the Golden Knights can do. We're going to talk about that more in segment number 2 here. Segment number 1, news and notes of the day. Before we get to that, I did want to let you know today's show is being brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOnToday to get started. We'll definitely tell you a lot more about them coming up after segment number 1. And first of all, news and notes. Today is supposed to be the final day of OTAs, but definitely don't believe that that's going to happen. I'm sure head coach Josh McDaniels is going to call that off. As a matter of fact, depending on what time you're listening to this show, it already may be called off. 9 times out of 10, 99% of the time, coaches, GMs, all that want to go ahead and cancel that last OTAs that they felt like they got enough work in throughout the course of the OTAs and the mandatory minicamp. And I believe that the Raiders are pretty pleased with what they were able to do. So I don't expect to see any kind or hear any kind of action that happens from the Silver and Black today. So today is supposed to be the last day of OTAs. They'll be off for about 6 weeks. And then it's full throttle. Then training camp opens up. And then it's getting time for the preseason, which gets you ready for the regular season. And then, boom, there we are talking about week 1 in Denver versus the Broncos. So as far as transactions go that the Raiders made on Wednesday, they finally came to agreement with second-round draft pick tight end Michael Mayer out of Notre Dame. Of course, he's the guy that I'm expecting to have a big-time impact when it comes to the red zone, and that's going to help the Raiders' red zone offense, which has been something that's been on the struggle bus for quite a while. Going back to Del Rio, going back to John Gruden, going back to, Rich Bisaccia, going back to last year with Coach McDaniels. I mean, just the red zone offense and efficiency has not been what it's supposed to be with talented players on the roster. And so I think Michael Mayer is going to have a lot to do with that. He was very good. And I mean very good with a capital V in the red zone at Notre Dame. Just go back and take a look at the numbers. Go ahead and look at some highlights. When it came to the red zone, Michael Mayer was able to eat in a major way. And I'm not saying he's going to have that big kind of impact for the Silver and Black his rookie year, but he's all part of a bigger puzzle, right? I mean, you have Devontae Adams, you have Hunter Renfrow, you have Michael Mayer. Of course, Josh Jacobs could still run it in. And at some point, that's the one thing in his career he has not done, had a receiving touchdown. At some point, Josh Jacobs is going to catch a pass and get into the end zone as well. But there's so many different options. Jacoby Myers is another option to get into the end zone. I just think that the Raiders' red zone offense, with the cast and characters they have now on offense, are going to be able to do some much better things than they've done in the past. And Jimmy G, if he's out there and he's healthy, and I hate to have to preface it like that, but that's just what it is. If he's out there and he's healthy, he's really good at throwing the ball in the red zone as well, getting it into the end zone, getting it into the playmakers' hands so they can score touchdowns as opposed to 3 points instead of kicking field goals. So Michael Mayer, second-round pick out of Notre Dame, signed, sealed, and delivered. Now they're just waiting on fourth-round pick Jacorian Bennett, the corner out of Maryland, to sign his contract, and they have the whole rookie class under contract. Also, wanted to bring this to the table, something that has been talked about, and it was talked about when this free agent veteran visited at the Intermountain Healthcare Performance Center with the Raiders, and that's cornerback Marcus Peters. I had Vic Tafer from The Athletic on my radio show on Wednesday, and he had a piece that he put out along with Tashawn Reed called Raiders Offseason Takeaways, latest on Jimmy Garoppolo, Chandler Jones, and Marcus Peters. So I always like to read their work. Those are guys that talk to people inside the organization all the time, so they get a little bit more information than I even get, right? I don't go looking for the information like that. Sometimes if someone tells me something, if something comes across my lap or whatever, then okay, I got that. But for the most part, I'm not the guy that's going to doing the investigating reporting. I'm not the beat writer. I'm the radio dude. I'm the podcaster. That's what I do. So I was reading his piece, and it really stood out to me when he was talking about the secondary. He's talking about Tyler Hall and Jacorian Bennett. He said that they appeared to make a case for themselves at minicamp. There's no contact in drills, so they're at half speed, so don't go buy their jersey yet. Said Hall may push Hobbs to the outside cornerback if he takes over the slot role, and Hobbs will be battling newcomers Duke Shelley, David Long Jr., and Bennett, as well as old friends Brandon Faison, Amik Robertson, and Sam Webb for a starting job. On my radio show, when I asked him about Nate Hobbs, I said, where do you think he's going to play in 2023, on the outside or the slot? And he said, I think Nate wants to play in the slot, but might have to play outside if Tyler Hall can win that job. And so I'm kind of interested that Nate Hobbs rather play in the slot. Of course, the outside corner is the big money corner, but we saw what he was able to do his rookie year playing in the slot, and it looked like he did a lot better. But that physicality that he brings to the table, I think, really helps on the outside. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens. But then another nugget that was in his piece, those guys may be competing for one starting job as the Raiders seem likely to sign veteran cornerback Marcus Peters before training camp. Wait. Say what? Those guys may be competing for one starting job as the Raiders seem likely to sign veteran cornerback Marcus Peters before training camp. That caught me by surprise. I didn't think that they would be in the market to try to sign him before training camp. I thought, if anything, they kicked the tires on him, did a physical on him, probably gauged his interest on if he wanted to play with the Raiders, told him what kind of money they were looking at, and said, all right, if we get to training camp and we don't like what we have, we'll pick up the phone and make a call. Or maybe they didn't tell him that, but that's what the plan was. Well, according to Vic, he believes that they're going to sign Marcus Peters before training camp gets started. So that's pretty interesting to me. So I asked him about that on my radio show, and I just said straight up, is it something that they saw in minicamp or OTAs, why they think that they need to go out and sign Marcus Peters? He said, no, not at all. He's just a veteran. He's got ball production, and it's something that they want. And even though he's not the Marcus Peters that he was a few years back, he still has ball production, has some skills. He's 30 years old, started all 13 games he appeared in with the Ravens last year, had 47 tackles, 2 for loss, a sack, and an interception. So you know that Marcus Peters comes with the production. You know there's going to be times that he frustrates you, but you also know that there's times that he's going to make plays. And there's something that I've been harping on quite a bit when it comes to the Raiders is the fact that they don't make enough plays, especially in the secondary. So Marcus Peters will bring that. But it's interesting with all the corners that the Raiders have right now in the room that competition would come down to basically one outside spot. If Marcus Peters gets signed as a veteran free agent, of course, he's going to hold down one. So who's going to get the other? Could it be a guy like a Duke Shelley? Could it be a David Long Jr.? Brandon Faison, I think that's a guy that's really going to compete for an opportunity to start. Where's Nate Hobbs going to be? Is it going to be in the slot? Is he going to be on the outside opposite of Marcus Peters? Very interesting, but it does sound like, according to Vic Tafer, that Marcus Peters will be a member of the Silver and Black sooner rather than later. So I think that a lot of Raider fans kind of got pumped up about that. But at the same time, like I said, I was a little surprised, only because I did think that they were going to give themselves some time to get some little bit of burn on the grass during training camp to see what they had in the young guys before they just made that kind of decision to move forward. But again, according to Vic Tafer, sounds like he's going to get signed sooner rather than later. So that's all I got for you for segment number 1, of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. I'm trying to skip through the show too quickly, man. Hold up. I know they want me to make sure the show's a little bit shorter, but not that short. Man, I don't want to cut it short like that. Get already done with segment number 2. No. We got segment number 2 on the way. We'll talk about the Aces. We'll talk about the Golden Knights and what the Raiders could learn from those two organizations' championship runs. One big takeaway that I have that I think that they could take away from those championship runs. We'll talk about that coming up in segment number 2 after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. And I know Stanley Cup finals are over. The NBA finals are over. It's all about baseball. It's all about the WNBA, the USFL, some early plays on the NFL season. Of course, the US Open is going on. So now is a perfect time to make a break to FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And I'll tell you right now, you can bet on everything. I already rolled out a few different plays, a few different sports that you can make your bet on. They've got you covered like a glove. Check it out right now. All new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500 That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Again, there's no better place to bet on all the action than America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's where you need to go. Get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. Again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to continue the conversation that we had on Wednesday's show talking about the Vegas Golden Knights and the Aces and the championship that they got and what the Raiders can do if the Raiders are up next. That was the first conversation. Could the Raiders be up next, right? Could that kind of put a little bit more pressure on the Silver and Black to get it done? Because now in Las Vegas, there's winning. Winning is an expectation. The Aces, they got it done. They won a championship. They were the first ones. The Golden Knights on Tuesday night, they got it done. They were the second ones. We talked about the Raiders. Can they be the third one? So on my radio show on Wednesday, I just had the open dialect conversation. What can the Raiders take away from the Aces and the Golden Knights championship runs? And for me, again, the Aces won their first year with Coach Becky Hammond, right? 2022. The Golden Knights finished their season off in 2023, champions, first year under head coach Bruce Cassidy, only 6 years in existence when it comes to the organization. But for me, my biggest takeaway, and what I think that the Raiders could take away, and I hope that they do take this away from what both the Aces and the Golden Knights were able to do, was be disciplined, right? And let's just even take the Aces out of it. Just discipline is the biggest key for me. The Vegas Golden Knights were the least penalized team all season long in hockey. The least penalized team. And that went a long way when the Florida Panthers, who were in the Stanley Cup Finals against them, tried to muck it up and tried to play bully ball and tried to get under the skin and tried to, physical them. The Golden Knights didn't sweat. They didn't panic. They didn't retaliate. They didn't let themselves get irritated. They didn't do anything stupid, right? They just rolled with the punches. And matter of fact, their head coach, Bruce Cassidy, said, sometimes you just got to take a punch in the face and roll with it. And that's what they did. They were able to take a punch in the face. They were able to, to get maybe a cheap shot and not fire a cheap shot back and allow themselves to put themselves in a penalty situation where all of a sudden now there's a power play against them. They didn't allow that to happen. They were the least penalized team all season long in the regular season, and that ran into the postseason as well on their run to the Stanley Cup championship. That's what they did. They were so disciplined. And if you remember, around this, not even this time, around training camp last year, under head coach Josh McDaniels for the first year, what was one of the biggest conversations we had on this show, on the radio? It was written about it in The Athletic, in the Review Journal, anywhere you read, ESPN, every single place that you got anything that had to do with Raiders, the conversation. And I do want to say that I'll take credit for this, because the conversation really started with me. I was told a little nugget while we were out at training camp, and I forget. I don't forget. It was Washburn. Washburn from CBS, and I forget his first name. Evan Washburn. There you go. Evan Washburn from CBS. No disrespect to him. I just slipped my mind on his name. But he had told me from covering Josh McDaniels that he's a coach that is going to first teach you how not to beat yourself. Like, you have to learn how not to lose before you can learn how to win. And he said that, and it stood out to me. So I remember specifically asking head coach Josh McDaniels about that in his media session, the very first media session we had following Evan Washburn telling me that. I said that to him, and he tried to trip me up. He said, wait, what do you mean by that? Hold on. Explain yourself. It's a trick question. I was like, no, it's not. And I re-explained myself. I said, no, you have to learn how not to lose before you can learn how to win. And then he went into some lengthy conversation, lengthy answer. It was great. And all of a sudden, Vinny Bonsignore, he's writing about it. Paul Gutierrez, he's writing about it. Anyone is writing about that conversation, because that was going to be the point of emphasis for the Raiders throughout training camp, throughout preseason, and you were going to see that go into the regular season, where they weren't going to beat themselves. They weren't going to have stupid penalties. They weren't going to have turnovers. They were going to play disciplined ball. They were going to just be focused on the little things and make other teams actually beat them as opposed to beating themselves. And they did a great job of that in training camp. You saw guys being held accountable, running laps when they made mistakes. Preseason, very little turnovers. Matter of fact, no turnovers, very little penalties. And then the regular season hit, and it was all out the door. You know why? Because, the regular starters weren't playing in the preseason. So those weren't the guys out there not having any turnovers. Those weren't the guys out there playing pretty clean ball as far as penalties go. It wasn't them. So when they got to the regular season, all that was out the window. And then all of a sudden it's back to, jumping off sides on 3rd and 4, giving up a first down because of a penalty, or doing something stupid, right? A unnecessary roughness penalty, a late hit on the quarterback, not creating that turnover when the ball's in your hands, hit you in the hands, and you put it on the deck, right? That's also part of it. Right, when you have an opportunity to create a turnover and you don't do it, and you allow a team to have another crack at it, and they usually capitalize on that. So all that discipline that they talked about and they preached all training camp long, all preseason long, all went out the window that first week in LA versus the Chargers, right? And then, of course, it continued throughout the course of the regular season. So I hope that they recognize that the Golden Knights, in such a sport like hockey, which is so physical, so violent, fights are happening all the time, we're able to play relatively clean ball. They were very, very disciplined. I hope they take that away. The other thing that I hope they take away, and I kind of wrote this down. I'm going to find my notes over here. I wrote this down on a piece of paper, some of the scores of the Golden Knights games in their run to the Stanley Cup Finals. And why I bring this up is because when the Raiders had leads in 2022, they didn't finish them. They didn't finish these teams off. When they were up on them, they couldn't score and put them away. They would get a field goal and leave the crack in the door still open, right? And as long as that crack in the door was open, that the other team, 9 times out of 10, kicked the door open and ended up winning that game. But I'm looking at the Golden Knights right here. Their final game that they won the Stanley Cup, it wasn't even close. They won 9-3. 9 goals, right? It got pretty out of control early. They were up like 1-0, 2-0, 3-0, and then they didn't stop. As opposed to the Raiders, when they got up 20-0 on the Cardinals, what happened? They couldn't score anymore. They couldn't put another touchdown on the board to put the Cardinals away. They allowed them to hang around. That was week 2. They took that L. All these games that they lost that were close games, that going back to the Steelers game, remember Christmas Eve, they were up at halftime. My buddy, one of my buddies from NFL Network, Nick Shook, he actually texted me right in the middle of the game. That was Christmas Eve. He texted me at halftime and said, they need to score more. If they don't score more, they're going to lose this game. What happened, Raider Nation? They lost that game. Couldn't score more. Couldn't put more points on the board. Remember they got that touchdown to Hunter Renfrow, to start the game? And what did they end up with, 10 points that game? Hardly anything. They started out hot and then couldn't do anything basically the rest of the game. They can't do that. When you get up on a team, you have to be able to put them away. When you start scoring, you can't get conservative. You can't try to take to wear the clock out, right? Teams come back too fast in the NFL. You can score too quickly. One blown coverage here, boom, that's a touchdown. Only a few seconds off the clock. You have to keep the foot on the gas. That was a problem with Gruden. He got conservative, and that was a problem with McDaniels a season ago. He got a lead and just sat on it instead of keeping the foot on the gas. A lot of that had to do with the fact that he didn't trust his quarterback. The players didn't know the offense as well as he'd like, so he didn't open up the playbook. So everything became pretty predictable. Things became, just, like I said, really slow motion, no sense of urgency. And the Golden Knights were able to do that. If you look at some of these scores, 9-3, these are all wins, 9-3, 7, 5, 6, 4, 6, 5, 4, 5, 5, 5, 4, 4, 4, 3. Those were the all 16 games that they won. I just rattled off what they scored in those games. 9, 7, 5, 6. This is hockey, right? That's a lot of goals in a hockey game. The ones that they lost, they only lost 6 games. 2, 2, 2, 1, 1, 1. Right? So, that's it right there. They didn't do anything in the games that they lost, but they only lost a handful of them. You look at what the Aces did under Becky Hammon. They played and they executed her style of ball. She came in and said, this is what we're going to do. This is who we're going to be. And you have to have buy-in. Everybody bought in. I believe the majority of that locker room last season was bought in, but I believe there's also some of the guys that they were counting on that weren't necessarily 100% bought in, like a Darren Waller. Like him a lot. Don't think that he was a good fit for this system. Hunter Renfrow was injured most of the season, so it really wasn't his fault. Waller was injured as well, so I don't want to throw shade at him at all, but both of those guys were injured, so it's really hard to buy in when you're not on the field. Right? And some other guys, Derek Carr, don't know if he really understood everything that Coach McDaniels wanted. So I don't want to say he didn't buy in, but he wasn't executing at the level that it needed to be executed at. And I'm sure that he wasn't calling the games. Coach McDaniels wasn't calling the games like he thought the quarterback could execute at a high level. Josh Jacobs, he executed at a high level. Devontae Adams, he executed at a high level. Max Crosby, executed at a high level. Chandler Jones, not so much. Corners, not so much. Safeties, not so much. Offensive line, Sure, they did well after they finally came together, right? I mean, so there was a lot. And again, these sports are totally different. The Super Bowl, I feel like, is probably the hardest thing to win. They're also playing in the toughest division in football, but you know what? You do it. No one thought the Miami Heat would be in the finals. They thought Boston was going to win the championship or the Bucks were going to win coming out of the East. At least that's what I thought. No, the Bucks are out early. Boston gets down 3-0, has to fight back, and still ends up losing. Miami's in the finals, right? I mean, just because you play in a tough conference or you play in a tough division doesn't mean you can't be the last man standing when it's all said and done. So those are the takeaways that I really hope the Raiders take away from both the Aces and the Golden Knights. Not a lot. Discipline, sense of urgency. When you're up on a team, put your foot on the gas and keep going, and then execute and have the buy-in. That's it. If you can do that, they've got talent. They've got plenty of talent. You can't tell me there's not talent on that team. I know it's there. They've just got to fine-tune what they can fine-tune. And what they can fine-tune is what we saw from the Golden Knights and the Aces, as there's 2 championships in Las Vegas, and now they're waiting for the third one to show up to the party. The third one is the silver and black. That's all I got for you. That's segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Coming up in segment number 3, your calls and texts. Straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. This is the Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line, 707-654-4693. Don't want to get too many in right here in segment number 3. Went a little bit long there in segment number 2. I'm trying to get this the timing down right on this show. I get it right for a couple of shows, and then all of a sudden it goes a little bit longer. So I'm trying not to do that. Want to respect the powers that be and their wishes when it comes to how long the show is. So let's start off with a text from Mike in Vegas. Say, what's up, Q? It's Mike from Vegas. I was just thinking after the Knights won the Cup, I understand the Knights were an expansion team, but I think the Raiders players can really see how the city will rally around its team when it commits itself to excellence. As soon as the Raiders move in that direction, I really feel they'll get all that same love. But like you said, they got to step up to the plate and put up those W's in order to win over this city. Here's the moving in that direction. Cheers. That's Mike in Vegas. I don't even have to expand on that. That is all true. You get out there, you get W's, you get a bunch of wins, you show the city that you can run with the Aces, you can run with the Golden Knights, you could be a champion as well, turn the city into a city of champions, and you tell you what, the parade for the Golden Knights is on Saturday. It's going to be epic. I'll tell you, if the Raiders were to win the Super Bowl, it would be a movie, right? It would be just incredible. I could just imagine you'd have folks from the Bay coming in. You'd have folks from L.A. coming in. You'd have folks from all over the world coming in for that parade. The Golden Knights parade is going to be awesome because the whole city loves the Golden Knights, but the whole world loves the Raiders, right? I mean, the Raiders are worldwide. The Golden Knights are citywide. Right? I mean, it's just that, and that's not a disrespect or a slight. I'm excited. I'll be down there on Saturday at the parade. It's going on the Strip, and it's going to end up at T-Mobile Arena, Toshiba Plaza. It's going to be amazing, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Pacific time. Can't wait. But it would be it would have nothing. It will have nothing on what the Raiders would have if the Raiders were to hoist the Lombardi sometime, somewhere. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Thank you so much for that text. Up next, got a call from Raider Castro from Bakersfield. He's calling to give his thoughts on the Raiders' Mount Rushmore, and he has an interesting twist to it. Here he is, Raider Castro from Bakersfield.
What up, Q? It's your boy, Raider Castro out of East Bakersfield, California. Just wanted to chime in on the Raider Mount Rushmore. So here it goes just real quick. Obviously, number 1, Al Davis, John Madden, Tom Flores. And I would say the 4th thing would probably be like a silhouette, if not the shield, of just a person, because there's so many Raider greats, past, present, you know, like you said, growing up is different from all of us. Some people grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, so maybe just a silhouette. But definitely those 3 men, Mr. Davis, Madden, Flores, that's my take. Raider Castro. Out.
Raider Castro, thanks for the call, my man. I appreciate you. Al Davis, John Madden, Tom Flores, and a silhouette or the shield. I like that. And wouldn't that be so Raider-like to have the shield? Could you imagine if, like, every team, if there was some big, I don't know, some monstrous area, right, where just mountains were everywhere, and every team had their Mount Rushmore. Every team would have their 4 players up there, or their, coaches and players, whatever the case may be. Their 4 people up on their Mount Rushmore. And then you look over the Raiders like Al Davis, John Madden, Tom Flores. Oh, and the shield, right? That would be so Raider-like, which would be cool. So I love that little twist that you put on it, seeing the shield up there, seeing a silhouette. That would be so Raider-like and kind of goes back to the whole not retiring the numbers, right? Numbers don't get retired. Players don't get put on Mount Rushmore. It's really about the silhouette. That's awesome. I do love it. Thanks so much, Raider Castro, for that. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Ernesto in Inglewood. He said, what's up, Q? It's Ernesto G from Inglewood, Cali, now living in Dallas. After hearing Monday's podcast, I needed to point out one thing that was missing from the running back equation. Look, I completely agree with the current value of the running back position, but how does that make us look as an organization if we don't reward a man that ran his butt off for us in a down year? What are the optics from other free agents who may want to play for us? They may not want to play for the Raiders because the team doesn't show any love no matter how good you played. Not saying overpay him, just give him a little more to show we appreciated what he did for us. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Love the show. My 11-year-old son and I are everyday listeners. That's Ernesto from Inglewood, now living in Dallas. So, Ernesto, thanks for that text. And, yes, I agree with you 100%. You cannot show Josh Jacobs the door. I know the value is down on the running back position, as you mentioned. But you cannot let him walk out the door and say, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. You can't. He meant way too much to the Raiders, and he proved that, right? The staff that's there now, Dave Ziegler, Josh McDaniels, they didn't know how much Josh Jacobs meant to the organization until he went out there and proved it, right? He played in the Hall of Fame game, had a couple runs there, right? And then all of a sudden went out and balled out and led the league in rushing and established an identity for the Raiders when they didn't have one. They absolutely didn't. Even the first couple games, it was like, all right, here's a couple carries. Oh, here's a bunch of carries. Oh, here's only a couple carries. Like, they didn't know what they were doing at that point. And Josh Jacobs proved to them who he was. He is an absolute leader, and you can't put a price on that leadership. You really can't. So I'm with you. I think that he should probably get a 2-year deal worth about, I don't know, I'd say maybe $24 million fully guaranteed. That's only $12 million a year fully guaranteed. The franchise tag is $10 million. I know it's not a whole lot of money. I know that there's conversation about maybe Saquon Barkley getting $14 million a year. Maybe split the difference, 13 for 2 years, give him a $26 million deal with a third-year option maybe. I could see that and be okay with that and feel like that's reasonable for a running back position that, again, is so devalued. Plus, he's 25. If you basically have him under control for the next 3 years, that's his year 28. You feel pretty comfortable about probably where the Raiders are at that stage of the game. So thank you so much for that text. I appreciate you. And tell your son I said, what up, though? Appreciate you guys listening and listening together. That's really cool. Let's get one more call in, and we'll wrap up the show today. Mike from San Jose. He's calling to talk about what the Raiders need to take that next step to give themselves a chance to compete in not only the AFC West, but the AFC in general. Here's Mike from San Jose.
Hey, what's going on, Q? What's going on, Raider Nation? This is Mike from San Jose. And I just wanted to call in, reiterate or emphasize we really need to shore up this defense. The saying goes, defense wins championships, and that rings to be true so much. I mean, we arguably have the best running back in the league, and I only say arguably because he was the league leader in rushing last year. And we have arguably the best wide receiver. So we have the weapons that you need on offense to be a great team. Derek Carr didn't play his best ball, though I think he said that he played his best ball last year. I think he made a lot of mistakes. The team as a whole made a lot of mistakes, crucial turnovers. So I think we just need to shore up our defense, and I think that is what gets us wins. Because, I mean, honestly, even for the San Francisco 49ers, they didn't always have great quarterback play. No, they were jumping from quarterback to quarterback last year, but their defense is what kept them in games. Hell, it's what won them games at times. They had a lot of pick sixes. So that's my little 2 cents. Anyways, let me hear your thoughts, Q. Later.
Mike, thanks so much for the call. I appreciate you, and there's no doubt about the defense. No doubt about it. right? The defense has to improve in a major way. And that's why the Raiders, and I know a lot of people didn't think that they did a lot on defense because there wasn't a bunch of splashy names, but they think about it. They brought in a bunch of free agents, 1 and 2 year deals for guys on the defensive side of things that are young, not have the big names, but guys that have bigger expectations and feel like their game is still, coming to themselves, or the game is starting to slow down for them and they're starting to come into their own. They did that, and then they're expecting, young dudes like a Bilal Nichols, who they signed as a free agent a year ago. Chandler Jones, who's not a young dude, but they signed him as a free agent a year ago. He's got to step up and live up to the expectations they're signing. Matt Butler, Neil Farrell Jr., those guys were draft picks a year ago. They're hoping that they step up, and of course they drafted 6 guys out of 9 on defense, so more rookies, and it's hard to bank on rookies. It really is, but that's what they're hoping, is that these young guys could develop pretty quickly, get in there and be, the backbone of this team and be that defensive complement to an offense that should be really strong if you have Jimmy G and all your weapons out there. So, yeah, the defense, there's no doubt about it, has got to be improved. That's how they have an opportunity to win games, win in the AFC West, win in the AFC. You get to the dance, you get to the playoffs, and good things could happen. But you got to get there first. Of course, you want to win it all when you get there, but you got to get there or you ain't winning nothing. It's just that simple. Mike, thanks for that call. I do appreciate you. And that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you so much for all the feedback. I definitely appreciate you. Coming up tomorrow, I got a tweet from Raider5150 at Raider850 on Twitter. Army Raider gave us a good call. A text from Silver and Black 86. I'll have more news and notes of the day. We'll have plenty of conversations as we get ready to close out the week really strong and head into the weekend. And, of course, we'll do that on tomorrow's show. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.